This series of videos introduces the 38 chapters of the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. It's a project of the Social Change Lab, and we gratefully acknowledge the support of the Mary Lee bequest for the work of our team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Winifred Lewis. I'm a professor of social psychology at the University of Queensland.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Zhang. I'm a psychologist and a research assistant in University of Queensland.
And what we're doing is participating in a big project to make introductory videos about all 38 of the chapters in the Handbook of Environmental Movements, the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. And in particular today, we're going to cover chapter 29, which is Everyday Activism and Everyday Life. Sorry, Environmental Activism and Everyday Life. And it's by Francesca Forno and Stefan Wallen. And I'll just tell you a little bit about where they're from. They're both sociologists by training. Forno is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Trento, and Wallen is a professor of sociology at the University of Gießen. So this concept of everyday activism refers to making choices for the environmental movement in your everyday life, including the purchases that you make, the way that you engage with production, the way that you relate to your transport and food choices, and really all of the behaviors that could be thought of as formerly in the private sphere. And I guess one of the things that the authors are trying to do is push back against the idea that the environmental movement is just about those big political collective protests, because there's really much more to it than that, isn't there, Andrea?
Yes, the author actually introduced there is three facets of everyday life that people can make use of their daily time, space, and resources and their modality to support the environmental movement. So the first facet is time. So this is really about how people can promote a more conscious use of time and a slower lifestyle in order to support the environment and also reduce the consumption of the fast way of living that kind of is distracting the environment around them. The reason behind that is the time use of individual also has several environmental consequences. For example, you can use your time more responsibly by like DIYing your own clothes instead of like consuming fast fashion that can relieve the burden of earth. And also the way of slow living is also promote sustainability. It is a mode of living that does not harm the environment and also can create a more friendly environment for the future generation.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so intuitive to think about, at least for those of us that are a bit older, how as our society has become more focused on efficiency and convenience, that we are also having more and more products and often throwing them away without reusing them, unlike previous generations. The second concept is space. And so here, obviously, environmentalists are aware, as we also talk about in the chapter on neoliberalism, that modern society often turns space into money through the process of privatization and commoditization. So a beautiful forest that everyone can enjoy becomes logs that a single company own and they cut down and market for wealth. And so in the space concept, people can share space and share a resistance to that kind of culture by creating a new system like community gardens or bartering that allows people to participate together in relationship to each other and to the earth in a way that doesn't turn nature into just money and only value it for its financial benefits. And then the authors talk about taking back the economy through practices like boycotting, which boycotting is when you refuse to buy something, and boycotting is when you make a positive choice to buy something, for example, to buy directly from farmers so that you can cut out those supply chains that sometimes promote unsustainable practices. And then what's the last one, Andrea?
So the last one is actually modality. And this is a new term that the author used to describe more like a habitual behavior of people. So it can be translated into people's action and attitudes. And this come across three levels of action: the cultural, the economic, and the political. This really focus on people's consumption the author encouraged people to consumption towards the local, the seasonal, and the fresh traditional, and also organic production instead of product that has a production process that really brings very negative effects to the environment. Attention is also paid into supporting supplies from renewable energy sources and to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels. And the modality is also about like your habits and actions to promote the political consumerism and sustainable lifestyles in routine life based on like how you can influence consumption behaviors to be more responsible, purchasing products that has a production process that is more friendly to earth.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot there, but I think there is a lot of environmental activity really focusing on, cooperation, solidarity, and mutual support instead of profit. Um, Part of the reason why this happens, of course, is the broader context of the environmental movement. And so, in the next section of the chapter, the authors talk about mobilizing everyday life to save the planet. Why, when, and how. And so, one question, I guess, is why. One reason why people have turned from the big protests of the 1960s and 70s to also develop this resistance at the everyday level is, on the one hand, the frustration with the slow pace of political change, and on the other hand, the new identities that formed after the 1960s. So, taking the first point, you know, although there's been lots of collective protest and political action over the last many decades, the pace of change simply hasn't been what the environment is demanding, and we haven't been able to achieve a trajectory towards a sustainable future that would, for example, prevent climate change. Habitat losses are continuing, development is continuing. And so part of the reason for that, the argument is that some of the traditional channels of interest mediation, the term they use, such as political parties and unions, the ways that people have represented their collective interests to try and make change in the social world, have been sidelined. And so there's new ideological narratives of the 20th century that are needed. The ideological narratives of the 20th century about political parties and the role of organized labor have not really been effective in the 21st century. And going along with that is the idea that people are forming new identities, that there's this lifestyle of liquid identities because of globalization, because of individualism and privatization. People don't have the same relationship to their countries, to their religion, to political parties, to their labor movement. And so they have these more individually oriented identities based on lifestyle. And so that creates a need for organizers to both reflect and tap into and mobilize these individual identities. And so their consumption and their choices, which are such a core aspect of people's sense of themselves in the 21st century, become central to the environment as well. And when did all this happen, according to the authors, Andrea?
So this everyday environmental activism can really date back to 1980s. It begins when there is a growing willingness of citizens to act politically in their role as consumers. They are also more aware that they have a choice to buy the product that is more friendly to the environment. And since the mid 1990s, there is also this political consumerism and lifestyle actions actually started to grow in context when they have become phenomenon. And it really is a turning point when the Battle of Seattle, which is a demonstration against the World Trade Organization in 1999. This represents there are many successful boycotting campaigns, and there are also certain movements that are successful, such as fair trade movements and the organic movements. And this boycotting is buying campaigns when people try to buy more from the local farmers and producers instead of buying products that is produced in a way that is more harmful to the environment.
Yeah. And I guess that sort of ties into the question of how. So, you know, how are environmental movements trying to create this everyday activism, and what does it look like? And so part of it is about information sharing about brands and products. So environmental organizations will publicize that certain companies are destroying, the earth in certain ways, that palm oil plantations are bad for the environment, for example, for certain palm oil products. And so that is one way. Another way is by trying to create new ways of relating producers and consumers. So the idea of fair trade, which is that you would think about whether the workers are paid fairly when you buy, or the idea of environmental sustainability and lots of labeling and certification, that you would buy products because the producers are relating to the environment differently, and you would try and support those producers over the long term. An interesting model for me that I really like, although I hadn't heard of it before, is Malucci's 1996 latency visibility model. And so this just simply refers to the idea that people participate in many movements and networks, and over time, as the wave changes, the old networks are still there. So people that participated in all the political actions of the Battle of Seattle and others, that is, those channels are there for information flow and mobilization and solidarity. So people are using political channels to pass information about consumer choices and vice versa. And that creates a new everyday activism. And then there's a specific discussion in the chapter of what are labeled differently by different scholars, organizations that try and build solidarity. So I come back to that idea of changing relations between producers and consumers. So cooperative movements or other movements that try to connect you as a consumer to producers so that you know who they are and you care about them and there's a relationship, so that we don't have these long supply chains that allow unsustainable practices to be promoted. And then there's a kind of section about different paths of everyday environmental activism, which I think really is returning to the point that there's different reasons why people have focused on this local and individual consumer and practices workers. And I think part of it was frustration that the state is ineffective, and part of it was new ideologies and informations that are spreading through social media and so on. And part of it is also about understanding that the collective world and the private world are not two distinct things. That was a point you made when we were talking earlier, right, Andrea?
Yes. What I really like about how the author states the individual responsibility that we can make in our daily life to support the environmental movements. When the changes made by the system is maybe considered not effective enough, we can actually act as individual and being aware how powerful that as a consumer we can actually take responsibility and choose the product that is more friendly to earth and that can be adapted into our everyday life, just like reading the text when you are doing shopping for the food and see where it is produced. Is it friendly to the environment? Just doing these small things and these small choices build up to become a more environmental daily life.
Yeah. And just really reflecting that as something that has positive potential, because it's so easy to get cynical, and particularly if you are focused on the political collective level, like I have been as a researcher, and indeed in most of my activism, that you would get cynical about those personal choices. But actually, it was really good to be reminded through the authors that this is not just individuals like discrete atoms. It's really part of a new movement, and the part of the movement is saying how you live matters, and the choices that we all make will matter and can change corporations, and through them change practices and change the relationship to the earth. So that's a very positive chapter. Thank you, Andrea, for participating in the recording today. And I also want to thank our viewers. Thank you for being here and watching. Bye now.
Bye.
For those of you watching, be sure to subscribe and follow us at Social Change UQ, and check out our website for more videos.